what you do, because we had a conversation
in an elevator.
In an elevator, and I'd really like to find out more about it because I think
Wonderful.
you're onto something big.
I lead an initiative called Global Citizen Year, and we empower high school graduates with a global perspective on themselves, our nation, and the world through a supported year before starting college, where they live and work as apprentices in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And the vision is that one day it's just the norm that high school grads take a year to learn about themselves and the world before continuing with their higher education.
So how did you come up with this idea?
I've been dreaming it up since I was 18. I finished high school, wanted to take a break before college because I didn't know anything but the classroom at that point. I called the Peace Corps on the phone and was told, little girl, we'll see you in 4 years, because you actually need a college degree to join the Peace Corps. So the irony that at age 18 you can join the military, but there is no national opportunity for global civilian service outside the military really stayed with me. And so honestly, ever since, I've been designing the blueprint for what is now Global Citizen Year.
So how many students do you have in your program now?
We launched 1 year ago with 11 students who came from very diverse backgrounds across the U.S. They spent the year in Africa and Latin America, came back last spring, and are now beginning their freshman year at colleges across the country. We've tripled the size of our second year's cohort, so we have 33 students who will be spending the year in either Senegal, Brazil, or Ecuador. And our CGI commitment is to reach 1,000 American high school grads by the year 2015.
So long-term effects, what do these students hope to gain personally? Now, obviously, you mentioned getting to know themselves. Do you think there's going to be more understanding because they've had some global experience?
Absolutely. So young people go out into the world and they live for an extended period in often small communities in the countries where they are. They're living with a host family, they learn to speak a new language, and they're learning a critical language, one that is important as an American in the world to today be able to interact beyond just English. So 9% of Americans speak another language as compared to 54% of our European peers. So our schools are doing an abysmal job of preparing Americans for global engagement, and the skills that you can develop through global immersion and real-life work experience serve you well, certainly for college, to approach your higher education with intention, a sense of purpose, broader perspective, but also for your career. There's no doubt that corporations are looking for young people who have 21st century skills that, frankly, very few college grads have even developed in the classroom.
Okay, so I think this is just marvelous. I don't quite understand this idea of apprenticeship. So they go there with a host family, so they have obviously the security of being in a close family because they're still young.
Exactly.
But the apprentice?
So the apprentice model is meant to be different from a traditional volunteer model or a traditional model of something like the Peace Corps, where you're sending a development worker out to really create sustainable local change, at least in theory, in the communities. We need to be sensitive to the fact that these are young people who, for the most part, haven't traveled, don't yet speak the local language, and really are meant to arrive and spend most of their time stepping back to observe, to listen, to really embed themselves in the family where they're living and the organization where they're working. And that's the role as an apprentice, is that they have a professional mentor, and they may be teaching in a school or shadowing a health professional in a health clinic. They might be working in the fields and supporting agricultural projects. They might be installing and training people to use appropriate technology, because that's certainly something that all young people coming out of school in this country can do, whether they realize it or not. It's a strength. They're all techies. So how do we put those skills to use in the service of supporting local efforts, but finding the right balance so that the frame is not them there to change the world in the short term, but actually them there to observe, learn, and find a way to contribute in a way that's valuable.
Well, okay, so how do you prepare these kids who are really maybe for the first time ever going to be away from home for any period of time? How do you prepare them to be away from their families, to accept and understand new cultural norms, and to still engage and learn while they're there?
Great question. So we begin working with the students as soon as they're admitted to the program, and they apply at the same time they would be applying to college. The college grants them a deferral, and there's an increasing trend toward college admissions offices encouraging kids to take time off before they start. Princeton University's taken the lead, where they have up to 10% of their incoming class where they're encouraging them to spend a year doing service work in the developing world before they enter as freshmen at Princeton. So our vision is to provide that service and that benefit to colleges across the country. So once the students have been admitted to the program, they spend the summer fundraising and mobilizing local supporters. And from our mind, that's actually an opportunity for them to begin to prepare for the experience. So they're learning to tell their story, they're learning to identify resources in their own communities, and it also then becomes an important way for them to own the experience. So whether their parents have supported the tuition or they've received a scholarship from one of our generous investors, foundations, and individuals who make the opportunity accessible financially, the students feel bought in. They've worked to earn what will then be a 9-month intensive leadership training. So the entire program is set up to support their own personal development and growth. Before they even travel, they all come together in California for a training boot camp, which is focused on authentic leadership. We work with Outward Bound and other professionals who train all kinds of leaders to understand their own strengths and limitations. We introduce them to social innovators so that they're meeting with social entrepreneurs, John Wood at Room to Read, the founders of Kiva.org, to really give them a sense for the type of career that people can pursue. And then we introduce them to the foundations of international development. So we have Stanford professors and practitioners from groups like CARE, the Clinton Foundation, the Gates Foundation, who come in and help our students develop a framework for understanding the context that they'll be living in and immersed in when they travel.
So these kids, some of them I understand from you mentioning scholarships, are some not necessarily from very advantaged families. So can you tell me a story about somebody who really wouldn't have been able to experience this and what they've gone through?
So from a mission perspective, we're fundamentally committed to providing access to kids who would have never had the opportunity to travel, whose parents haven't traveled. So I met Matt Davis a year ago. He grew up in real poverty in Indianapolis. He'd never been on an airplane, and I had the terrific fortune of being introduced to him by a mentor that he had in his hometown. And he knocked my socks off in the interview, and here was a young man who was almost failing out of high school because it was just so irrelevant to his life. And he described to me the challenge of living in a family where there wasn't always rent or electricity or even consistent food on the table, and how was it possible for him to then focus on his math homework when those were the challenges that he faced daily. And he explained how he had always dreamed of spending time in Africa as an African-American male, and to have the insight into where his people came from initially and what his real identity is as being part African, part American, and then really coming to a new conclusion of what that identity is, which is kind of not a 1+1, but actually something entirely different. So Matt spent the year living and working on a farm in a rural community outside of Dakar, Senegal. He worked a couple days a week with a family farm where he was watering tomatoes and peppers. A couple days a week he was on a big agricultural commercial farm where he was understanding the production cycle and some of the challenges that are faced by bigger farmers in that community. And then he made his way into Dakar at some point and connected with a USAID official who became his mentor, and he started connecting the dots. Through his experience with Global Citizen Year, clearly have transformed everything about what he now aspires to do.
Well, it sounds to me that you actually have an amazing program, and if you could tell me in 10 years where you expect to be, where do you think that is?
10 years, I hope that the most common question that high school graduates are asked is, where will you do your Global Citizen Year? So when others are scrambling for college admittances and college applications, can it be the common expectation that young Americans, as part of their duty to our country and as part of their training in the world, experience life in places far beyond our borders? 10 years from now, the vision would be 10,000 young Americans participating in Global Citizen Year every year.